But what happens to those Chinese firms once Biden is inaugurated? Well, indeed, what will the U.S.-China relationship look like as a whole? Let's bring in Liang, professor of economics at Willamette University. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So as we're seeing in his final days in office, President Trump continuing his scrutiny of Chinese companies listed in the U.S. with his recent executive orders to ban transactions with several Chinese apps. And now, of course, we're seeing the delisting of Chinese companies as well. Why make such a move and why at this point?
Right. So, that just shows the desperation of the Trump administration, right? As the days and hours in White House are numbered. So he's taking all these arbitrary scattered shots on Chinese companies. So I think the latest move, again, is the excuse was these three companies, the Chinese state-owned enterprises, have ties with the military. And then the ban on the transactions on the 8 Chinese software apps are, again, they threaten the national security with the consumer privacy, etc. But again, I think this is really just the last-minute, scattered shots on China. But it's very likely that these will not sustain. And when Biden takes over, it could reverse course, with a new presidency.
And certainly with executive orders, they can be reversed by the next president. Now, it's interesting because the ban on those Chinese software apps actually kicks in during the Biden presidency. So do we have any sense of how China's relationship with the U.S. will look during Biden's administration, given where things currently stand on issues like tech, as well as the China trade deal?
Right. Well, this is the great question. And I think this is a question that everyone is pondering about. And I think most of analysts argue, which I agree, that Biden's presidency is probably going to have the same kind of, sort of seeing China as the rivalry, as the competitor. So it would be a change in the tone rather than the substance in terms of the engagements. But I think, having a constructive tone is still very important. And Biden pledges a multilateral approach to engage with China and maybe wage the pressure campaign and to, comply China to the Washington's standards. But again, I think this is not an easy task as China is building, economic partnerships with the RCEP countries, and also with the recently concluded the EU-China comprehensive investment agreements. And so I think it would not be a very easy task for Biden to have the anti-China coalition. And what I think Biden should do, as I recently wrote a commentary, is really trying to exercise persuasion and offer guidance on issues like, IP protection or market access, where China's long-term interest actually lies. And I think also to trying to build collaborations, despite all the differences, on issues such as climate change or pandemic.
Now, as the only major economy to grow in 2020 and with about 8% GDP growth predicted by the World Bank in 2021, what will be driving China's economic growth?
Right. So, Beijing is working to increase the domestic consumption demand. So I think we'll continue to see the government support on, infrastructure investments and also in consumption support. So there are different debates about how to go about doing that. There is the effort to promote the so-called new consumption, so online consumption, experiential consumption, etc. But the government will continue to exercise, fiscal stimulus, etc., to try to promote the economy. So I think also with trade, with China's exports and manufacturing, those will continue to drive China's economic growth.
And as you mentioned manufacturing, let's look at some of the highlights from China's manufacturing and services sector data this week. What do these figures really tell us about the overall health of China's economy?
Right. So the indicators, the PMI, have showed that the manufacturing and also service sector had a slowdown in expansion. But I wouldn't read too much into that slowdown, because when it comes to manufacturing, it really is still expanding. The PMI indicator was 53.9. So it's a very healthy expansion, even though it is a slowdown compared to November, which is still at 59. But again, it's a healthy expansion 8 months in a row, and it came down from a very high place, a high basis. But I think it will continue to grow, even though I think the slowdown has something to do with the restricted electricity supply in the south of China. And service also slowed down a little bit in the expansion. Partly, I think it's because of sporadic increase in the COVID cases that might have reduced consumer willingness to go out and spend.